The most basic of human needs can become incredibly awkward to accommodate when you're in space. On Earth, going to the toilet is a rather uncomplicated affair. In zero gravity, not so much. So, how do you design a space toilet? Right, we all know what urine and feces look like, and there's arguably no need for realistic looking animations. So, for this video's purposes, we're going to have robot astronauts and blue waste. You'll thank me later. The difficulty with pooping in space mainly comes from the lack of gravity. Technically, astronauts orbiting the Earth are affected by gravity, but because they are in orbit and are in a continuous state of free fall, the end result is microgravity. Anyway, on Earth, gravity has the effect of drawing human waste away from the body. In space, this doesn't happen. Without intervention, it kind of just hangs around. Therefore, to draw the waste away from the body, suction is used. We're going to take a look at the waste and hygiene compartment on the International Space Station. The toilet itself is of Russian origin, with a few modifications made along the way. To deal with urine, a fan is spun that generates suction, and this is directed through a flexible hose with a nozzle attached to its end. The suction pulls the urine away down the hose to be collected. Solid waste is a little more challenging to deal with. The toilet generates suction, which helps to pull the waste away from the astronaut's body. The waste is then drawn down into a waiting bag. The astronaut deposits any used wipes into the bag and then detaches the bag from the rim of the toilet. This is then pushed down into the collection unit with a very high-tech stick, and a replacement bag is attached to the rim of the toilet. That's all pretty straightforward, and fairly universal as well. The first space toilets were on Soviet spacecraft, and the same basic design has been more or less consistent throughout spaceflight history. The orbital Soyuz module, Mir and Salyut space stations, NASA Skylab and Shuttle all followed the same rough design. Details changed, but the fundamental process of suction and collection has been utilized throughout. The differences are mainly in the design choices regarding what to do with the waste once collected. With solid waste on short duration missions, most designs opted to store the waste to be emptied when the craft returned to Earth. For space stations such as the ISS or Mir, solid waste was packed into returning supply spacecraft along with other rubbish and either returned to Earth or left to be burnt up in the atmosphere during re-entry. Urine on the ISS is stored and processed, extracting the water from it and recycling it back into the station's water supply. Who said being an astronaut wasn't glamorous? Smaller spacecraft tend to just store the urine or jettison it. Ejecting urine into space can be surprisingly beautiful to watch, as seen in the classic film Apollo 13. As the urine is jettisoned, it freezes into countless crystals, which reflect incoming light, generating a rather impressive spectacle. Dumping urine does, however, come with a few risks. The Mir space station jettisoned its cosmonauts' urine into space, but over time the repeated impact of frozen urine crystals damaged one of the station's solar panels, reducing its output to only 40% of baseline. The ISS utilizes its water recovery system to recycle water for astronaut use. The urine processor assembly recovers water, and the air revitalization system pulls water from the atmosphere, generated by the crew's respiration and perspiration. Overall, the system's recovery rate is about 93.5%, and this yields huge cost savings. A crew of 6 astronauts produce around 9 kg of urine per day. About 8.5 kg of this is recycled back into drinkable water. That's 8.5 kg of water every day that doesn't need to be sent up in a supply rocket. Using SpaceX's Falcon 9 system, resupply costs are around $2,700 per kilo. Recovering water from the astronaut's urine saves nearly $23,000 every day and over $8 million per year. The cost of getting cargo into orbit has dropped dramatically in recent years. Back in the days of NASA's space shuttle, costs per kilo were around $55,000. Back then, water recovery would have saved over $160 million in 1 year. The benefits are obvious, but how is it actually done? How do you recover water from urine in space? The urine is collected and fed into the urine processor assembly. It is spun inside a distillation assembly, to force it to the outside walls of the unit. There it is heated to evaporate about 85% of the water out of it. This vapour is condensed in the outer chamber of the spinning assembly and then pumped to a tank along with water recovered from the station's atmosphere. This water mix is then passed through numerous types of filters and heated to sterilise it. After being dosed with iodine, it is checked for contaminants before being fed into the potable water supply system. The first processing operation of recovering the water from the urine generates both water and a concentrated urine brine, and the latter still contains some water. This brine is pumped into the brine processor assembly, where it is stored in a dual-layer bladder. The membrane layers of this bladder allow water vapour to pass through them, but they keep the liquid contained within them. Warmed air from the cabin is passed over the bladder, and the water vapour is swept along in this air current, increasing the humidity of the cabin atmosphere. The space station's air has its water vapour extracted by the environmental control systems, and this is plumbed back into the station's water supply. The addition of this extra step brings the water recovery rate of the station up to nearly 95%. In September of 2020, NASA sent a new generation of space toilet to the ISS, the Universal Waste Management System. This new generation of space toilet, costing $23 million and taking 6 years to develop, brings with it some significant improvements over the last generation. The toilet itself is 65% smaller and 40% lighter than the pre-existing ISS design, and utilises many more off-the-shelf components as opposed to custom-produced components. The design is more refined, and unlike previous generations, allows for so-called dual ops, dealing with both solid and liquid waste at the same time. These design improvements are important for future missions venturing further into space. Trips to Mars and extended visits to the Moon will require better water efficiency than we can currently achieve. Supporting these voyages via resupply missions will not be feasible. All the water they need must be taken with them. NASA has stated that they will require water recovery rates of at least 98% before they can consider sending anyone to Mars. And that's still a way off yet, but the new improved toilet is a step in the right direction. Currently, solid waste is not processed to recover water, but it consists of around 75% water by mass, so it's a promising avenue for further research. Once again, who said being an astronaut wasn't glamorous? We've spoken about the current and future developments of space toilets, but let's go back to the early days of space travel and the beginnings of toilet provisions for astronauts. America's first man in space, Alan Shepard, piloted his Mercury capsule on a suborbital flight into space in May of 1961. As it was a short duration flight, only around 15 minutes, no provision had been made to allow for calls of nature. However, due to numerous delays, Shepard was forced to wait for several hours strapped into his capsule on the launch pad. As it was not feasible for him to leave the capsule to visit a bathroom, he was forced to wet his spacesuit. Far from ideal. Whilst the first space flights were short affairs, as the Gemini program and later the Apollo program progressed, flights were extended from mere minutes to nearly 2 weeks long. The astronauts could no longer be expected to simply hold it, and so solutions were put into place to address their needs, but these were a far cry from the relative luxury of more modern space toilets. The crew capsules throughout these missions were cramped and had been manufactured to be as light as possible. A space toilet was simply out of the question. For urination, each of the astronauts used a urine collection pouch. These came in different sizes, but as opposed to a small, medium and large naming scheme, NASA instead labelled them extra large, immense and unbelievable. Spills were commonplace, but the system was light and simple, so the astronauts made do. The solution for solid waste was decidedly less pleasant. A few varieties of solid waste containment were utilised, but they culminated in the Apollo Faecal Containment device. This was little more than a plastic bag that the astronaut taped to his buttocks. It featured a finger tube that would allow for manual assistance and push the poop down into the bag. After depositing used wipes into the bag, an antibacterial pouch was placed inside to prevent gas buildup in the now sealed device. Aren't you glad I left most of the details to your imagination when animating this section? Leaks from the urine collection devices were unpleasant, but a mishap with a fecal containment device on the flight of Apollo 10 led to, quite possibly, the funniest mission audio NASA has ever produced.
Oh, who did it?
Who did what?
Who did it? Give me a napkin quick. There's a turd floating loose.
I didn't do it. It ain't one of mine.
I don't think it's one of mine. Mine was a little more sticky than that.
God almighty. Here's another goddamn turd. What's the matter with you guys? Here, give me a...
Was it just floating around?
Yeah.
Thankfully, we've come a long way since then. As we expand our reach throughout our solar system, the future of space travel comes with a whole host of technical challenges that we need to overcome. Space toilet engineering may not be the most glamorous of endeavours, but for the brave astronauts embarking on perilous journeys who just want to be able to go comfortably and efficiently, it may be a matter of the utmost importance. If you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe. You might also like my podcast. Just search for the Media Ward podcast in your podcatcher of choice.